I had $63.42 in a savings account that was supposed to hold everything I had left in this world. I didn't know that when I walked into the branch that Tuesday morning. I thought I was just picking up a bank draft for my property taxes. I was wearing the same jacket I'd worn to my wife's funeral 8 months earlier because it was the only warm one I owned that still smelled faintly like the cedar closet we shared for 31 years. Small thing, stupid thing to notice, but that's where my head was. The woman at the counter, young, with dark braids pulled back and reading glasses she kept pushing up her nose, typed in my account number without looking up. Then she stopped. She looked at the screen again. She looked at me. She said quietly, almost too quietly for the noise of the branch around us, "Sir, I think you should speak with one of our account managers. There's something here you need to see." She wasn't alarmed, exactly, but her voice had dropped the way people's voices drop when they're about to tell you something that's going to change your afternoon, or your life. My name is Arthur Fleming. I'm 61 years old. I spent 34 years as a surveyor with the province of Ontario, most of it working out of offices in Sudbury and then Barrie. I retired early, well, not quite willingly, after a back injury that made field work impossible. My wife, Carol, had been a supply teacher. Between her pension, mine, and the money we'd gotten from selling our house in Barrie after she was diagnosed, we had a little over $230,000 set aside. It wasn't a fortune, but it was supposed to be enough. Carol died in March. She was 60 years old. Ovarian cancer, caught late. We had 14 months between the diagnosis and the end, and I spent most of those 14 months either sitting beside her hospital bed or driving to and from it. I didn't sleep much. I didn't eat properly. I let a lot of things slide because there was only one thing that mattered, and then that thing was gone. Our son Brendan is 40 now. He lives in Mississauga with his wife and their 2 kids, and he was good during that time. He came up as often as he could, helped with logistics, sat with his mother on weekends when I needed to sleep. Our daughter Lydia is 36. She lives in Edmonton. She flew in for the diagnosis, flew in once more in the fall, and was there for the last week. She called every Sunday. She sent flowers on Carol's birthday. And then there was our other daughter Sandra. 38 years old, lives 20 minutes from where I was renting a small place in Barrie after we sold the house. She's the one I called when the pipes in the rental froze. She's the one who drove me to my own follow-up appointments after my back flared up again that summer. When Carol got sick, Sandra was the one who reorganized her whole schedule to be available. When Carol died, Sandra handled the death certificates, the calls to Service Canada, the calls to the pension office. She just did it, without being asked. A year before Carol passed, when we could both see which way things were heading, my wife and I sat down and decided to add Sandra as a co-owner on our joint savings account. It was practical. We needed someone who could access funds quickly if something happened, pay bills, manage things. Sandra was right there. It made sense. What I did not understand, and I want to be clear that this is entirely on me, not on the bank, not on Carol, on me, is that adding Sandra as a co-owner meant exactly what it sounds like. She didn't need my permission to make withdrawals. She had the same legal access to that account as I did. I found that out sitting across from the account manager, a man named Peter, who had the specific kind of careful face people develop when they deliver bad news to seniors on a semi-regular basis. He turned his monitor slightly so I could see it. The account that had held $230,000 9 months ago held $63.42, I said. "That can't be right," he said it was. I asked him to print the transaction history. He did. It was 11 pages long. I sat in that chair for a long time. Peter gave me water. He was kind about it. But there was nothing he could do, he explained carefully, because all of the withdrawals had been made by an authorized account holder. Everything was technically legal. The account had 2 owners. One of them had spent 9 months emptying it, in amounts ranging from $800 to $12,000, at irregular intervals, in a pattern I now recognized as deliberate, not so frequent that it would trigger an alert, not so large that it would look like a single theft. Methodical, patient. I drove home and sat in my kitchen for 3 hours before I called anyone. The first person I called was Brendan. He didn't believe me at first, which I understood. I barely believed myself. He said there must be a mistake, that Sandra would never, that I must have misread something. I read him the numbers over the phone, transaction by transaction, and his end of the line went very quiet. He said he'd call me back. He called me back 40 minutes later and said, Dad, I need you to not say anything to Sandra yet, just wait. I waited. What I didn't know, what I found out later, was that Lydia had been trying to reach me for weeks. She'd sent emails I hadn't opened because I was still barely keeping up with anything. She'd called twice and I'd said I was fine, just tired, the way I said to everyone. She had noticed something. She told me later, during one of Sandra's Sunday calls, when Sandra had mentioned, almost in passing, that she was helping Dad manage a few financial things. Lydia had asked me about it on the phone and I'd said yes. Sandra was handling some bills, everything was fine. I hadn't thought anything of it, but Lydia, 2 provinces away, working full-time, raising 2 kids, had quietly written down what Sandra said and compared it to what I'd mentioned over 6 months of Sunday calls. She had built a rough picture in her head. She didn't have access to anything, no account numbers, no statements. She just had the nagging feeling that the numbers didn't add up, and she hadn't pushed it because she didn't want to cause trouble in the family. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like she should have said something sooner. But I also know that when you love your family, you spend a long time hoping you're wrong before you let yourself be right. The week after I found out, Brendan drove up and sat with me while I went back to the bank with a lawyer, a referral from legal aid, a no-nonsense woman named Harriet who had clearly seen this kind of thing before. She looked at the transaction history with the expression of someone reading a bus schedule. Not surprised, just taking inventory. She told me that because Sandra was a legal co-owner, criminal charges were difficult, civil action was possible. Recovery of funds depended on whether Sandra had assets. Harriet also told me that there was an additional layer here that made things more complicated and more painful. Sandra's husband, Derek, had recently started a landscaping business. In the same 9 months Sandra had been emptying my account, Derek's company had purchased a commercial vehicle, a trailer, and a full set of equipment, cash or close to it. I don't know how to describe what that felt like. I'd known Derek for 12 years. He'd coached my grandson's hockey team. He sat across from me at Christmas dinner every year, and either he had known what his wife was doing with her dying mother's savings account, or he had simply never asked where the money came from. I'm not sure which one is worse. I didn't confront Sandra directly. Harriet advised against it. Instead, I called my bank and removed her as a co-owner. You can do that unilaterally in Ontario if you're the original account holder, though the account had so little left in it that it was mostly symbolic. I had a locksmith change the locks on the rental. I stopped answering her calls. She texted me at first. She asked if I was feeling okay. She said she'd been meaning to stop by. She said she hoped I wasn't overdoing it. Ordinary messages, normal daughter messages. I read every one of them and put my phone down and walked outside and stood in the cold for a while. There was a point, maybe 6 weeks after I'd found out, when I began to wonder if I had made a mistake. Not about the money, the evidence was clear, but about Sandra herself. I started picking through my memories of the past 9 months, looking for signs I'd missed. And I found them, the way you always find them once you know what you're looking for. Sandra had never shown me a bill she'd paid. She'd said she was organizing my accounts, but had been vague about the details. She gently discouraged me from setting up online banking access for myself, saying it would be confusing, that she had it covered. Once, about 5 months ago, she'd mentioned that the account balance was getting a bit low and suggested I might want to start looking at whether to sell some RSPs. I hadn't thought anything of it. I'd been exhausted. I'd just nodded. She had known exactly what she was doing, and she had known that I was too deep in grief to pay attention. Lydia flew in from Edmonton that November. She didn't make a big announcement about it. She just showed up on a Thursday, knocked on my door with 2 bags of groceries, and made me dinner. We sat at my kitchen table for 4 hours, she cried. I didn't, not then. I think I'd run out of whatever produces tears by that point. But I held her hand across the table, and I told her what I should have told her months ago, which was that I was sorry for not listening when she'd been trying to warn me. She shook her head. She said she should have been louder. We both sat with that for a while. Brendan came up the following weekend. He'd been on the phone with a civil litigation lawyer, someone Harriet had referred him to, about options. The news wasn't good. Sandra and Derek had spent most of the money, or what could be traced was spent. The equipment Derek had bought was in the company's name. Clawing anything back would be a fight, and the legal fees could easily exceed whatever we recovered. I made the decision not to pursue it in court. That was mine to make, and I made it. Some people will think that's wrong. Maybe it is. But I'm 61 years old with a bad back and a grief I'm still carrying around. And I didn't have the energy left to spend years in a lawsuit against my own daughter. I wanted what was left of my life to be quieter than that. What I did do was contact a financial advisor, something I should have done years ago, and sit down to actually look at what I had left and what was possible. I had my private pension. I had Carol's survivor benefit from CPP. I had a small RRSP I hadn't touched. I had the equity I'd gotten from selling a second vehicle we'd owned in Barrie. It wasn't $230,000, but it was something. Harriet helped me set up a power of attorney properly for Lydia, with very specific limits and oversight requirements, and helped me close every financial account Sandra had ever been connected to. I also finally told my brother about what had happened. He's older than me, lives out in Nova Scotia, and we'd never been particularly close. But he called me in December, just to check in the way he does every few months, and I told him the truth instead of saying I was fine. He listened for a long time. Then he said, "You know, Arthur, I always thought that one wasn't right." He didn't say it meanly. He said it the way people say things they've been holding back for years. I don't know if Sandra is sorry. I don't know if she thinks about what she did. I don't know if Derek asked her about the money, and she lied to him, or if they planned it together over dinner, while the kids did homework at the next table. I think about that sometimes, and then I stop thinking about it, because it doesn't change anything and the wondering just makes me tired. What I know is this. Lydia spent 8 years in Edmonton, building a career and a life, and every single year she called on Christmas morning, and on both of our birthdays, and on the anniversary of when Carol was diagnosed. She sent presents for the grandkids without being asked. She sent me a card in April, 6 weeks after Carol died, with a handwritten note inside, not a Hallmark note, a real one, 3 paragraphs about specific memories she had of her mother that she didn't want to lose. I still have that card in the kitchen drawer. Sandra, who lived 20 minutes away, who showed up, who I thought was the one who really showed up. She was present in a way that made the theft easier. That's the sentence I've turned over and over in my head since November. She was present in a way that made the theft easier. Last spring, I drove out to Edmonton. First time I'd been there. Lydia's kids. I have 2 grandchildren out there, a girl who is 11 and a boy who is 8. Took me to some kind of indoor climbing gym and watched me fail to climb even the beginner wall with great and vocal delight. We ate poutine for dinner from a place that Lydia's husband Craig insisted was the best in the city, and I said it was very good, and did not mention that the poutine in Barrie is also perfectly fine. I stayed for 10 days. On the last night, Lydia and I sat on her back deck after the kids were in bed. It was still light out at 9 o'clock the way it is in Alberta in June, that long, slow prairie sunset that takes forever to finish. She asked me how I was, and I thought about it for a real moment before I answered. I said I was okay. Not fine. I've stopped saying fine, but okay, rebuilding. Slower than I'd like. She asked if I had heard from Sandra. I had, actually. A few weeks before the trip, Sandra had sent a letter, a real one, on paper, in an envelope to my address. It was 2 pages. I won't say everything that was in it, but the short version is that she said she had used the money to keep the family financially afloat during a hard time, and that she had always intended to pay it back. She said she was sorry if I felt betrayed. I noticed she didn't say she was sorry for what she did. She said she was sorry for how I felt. I showed the letter to Harriet. Harriet said it was consistent with how these situations usually go, and to keep it somewhere safe in case we ever decided to revisit the legal question. I told Lydia about the letter on the deck that June evening. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Dad, what do you want to do?" I didn't have an answer. I still don't, fully. What I do know is that I am not going to rush back to a relationship with someone who spent 9 months carefully, systematically removing the financial security that her mother and I spent 30 years building. I'm not going to do that because I'm lonely, or because the holidays feel strange now, or because some people in my life think family is family no matter what. Family is not a reason to accept theft. Family is not a reason to pretend that something didn't happen. But I also know that I am 61 years old, and I have already lost more than I expected to lose by now. And I don't know what the years ahead look like, or what I'll want when I get there. What I know for certain is that the person sitting across from me on that deck in Edmonton, watching that ridiculous long Alberta sunset, is someone who flew out to see me, and who made dinner, and who cried at my kitchen table in November, and who asked me, straight and simple, what I wanted to do, as if what I wanted was the thing that mattered. I've spent most of my life assuming that the people closest to me geographically were the people closest to me in every other way. I thought proximity meant presence. It doesn't. I know that now. The teller who pushed up her reading glasses and told me, quietly, that I needed to talk to someone. She probably doesn't know what she started. She was doing her job. She noticed something that I should have noticed months earlier, and she said something instead of letting it go. I've thought about that a lot. Notice things, say them. Don't let grief or exhaustion or family loyalty talk you out of saying what you see. My wife used to say that the people who do the quiet work are rarely the ones who get the credit. She was talking about teaching, I think, the late marking, and the early starts, and all the things that happen before the class ever sits down. But I think about those words now when I think about Lydia, 2,000 kilometers away, watching and worrying and not saying anything because she didn't want to upset the family. I think about what it cost her to hold that in, and what it would have cost us both if she'd held it a little longer.